Welcome back. In our previous video, we looked at how to convert a quadratic function that's in standard form into vertex form by completing the square. In this video, we're going to look at another example, but this example has a negative 5 over 6x in there. So it has a fraction in it, which can be intimidating and can complicate the process. However, you're still following the same series of steps. So what we're going to do in this example is convert this into vertex form and see how this fraction impacts this process. The first step is exactly the same. We're going to factor out the leading coefficient from the first two terms. Now the leading coefficient is this 2 right here. So when we go to factor it out, we are taking the 2 outside of the brackets, and inside the brackets, 2x squared divided by 2 gives us an x squared from our first term. In our second term, we have to do negative 5 over 6 divided by 2. So this is where things can feel a little bit intimidating. I'm going to solve that under. So we have negative 5 over 6, and we are trying to divide that by 2. Now, when we're dividing fractions, it can be helpful to convert the whole number into a fraction as well. And remember, you can do that just by drawing a line under and adding a denominator of 1. So you can change any number into a fraction just by putting 1 on the denominator. Now with dividing fractions, I like using an analogy, so keep, change, flip. Keep goes with the negative 5 over 6. Change goes with the division sign. And flip is going to go with the 2 over 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep the negative 5 over 6. We're going to change the division sign into a multiplication sign. And then we're going to flip the 2 over 1 and make it 1 over 2. So now we have a fraction multiplication problem. We can multiply the numerators together. Negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. And 6 times 2 gives you 12 on the bottom. So when we go to factor out the 2 from the negative 5 over 6x, what we're left with is negative 5 over 12x. And then we can close our bracket and have the 1 outside of the brackets. So that's our very first step. Now let's look at our second step. So our second step is to take the coefficient of the x term inside the brackets, divide it by 2, and then square it. So we're looking at the 5 over 12. We want to divide that by 2, and then we're going to square it. So we have negative 5 over 12. We want to divide that by 2. And remember, same thing as before. We're going to change the 2 to a 2 over 1. And then we're going to use keep, change, flip to figure out what this turns into. So we have negative 5 over 12. We're keeping that the same. We're changing the division sign to a multiplication sign. And we're flipping the 2 over 1 into a 1 over 2. So same thing as before. Negative 5 times 1, multiply the numerators, you get negative 5. 12 times 2, you multiply the denominators, and you get 24. So that is just the first part of this. Take the coefficient of the x term inside the brackets, divide it by 2, but we also need to square it. So now we have negative 5 over 24, and we need to square this term. Squaring the negative 5 gives us a 25 as the numerator, and squaring the denominator gives us 576. So just like before, I'm going to stick this in a box because it's going to be important later. So we can come up and get that number later when we need it. But we have taken the coefficient in front of the x term, we've divided it by 2, and we've squared it, which then brings us to our third step. So our third step is to add and subtract the squared number inside the brackets. So just as a reminder, the squared number was 25 over 576. So I'm going to add and subtract that within the brackets, turning this into y is equal to 2 x squared minus 5 over 12x plus 25 over 576 minus 25 over 576, and then plus 1 at the very end. So I just took that number from up here, the 25 over 576, and I've added it and subtracted it within the brackets. Perfect. Now let's look at our next step. So our next step is remove the negative number by multiplying it by the leading coefficient. So the negative number we're talking about here is negative 25 over 576, and we want to remove that by multiplying it by the leading coefficient, which is 2 in this case. So we have to multiply that by 2. So let's look at how that works. We have negative 25 divided by 576, and we're trying to multiply this by 2. So what I'm going to do here is I'm only going to add the 2 into the numerator because I know my denominator is even, which means I can divide that by 2. So I'm going to keep the top as negative 25 multiplied by 2, and I'm going to change the bottom into, so 576 divided by 2 is 288 multiplied by 2. And the reason I'm doing that is so I can cross out my 2's and end up with a reduced fraction here. So the reduced fraction is negative 25 over 288. So when I go to take that out of the brackets, I end up with y is equal to 2 x squared minus 5 over 12x plus 25 over 576. And then the number outside the brackets now is negative 25 over 288. And I still have my plus 1 at the end. And that brings us to our last step. So our last step is to factor the perfect squared trinomial. And we also have to simplify the numbers at the end. So to simplify the numbers at the end, because we're working with fractions, I need a common denominator for the 1. So I'm just going to multiply the 1 by 288 over 288. And remember, to factor that perfect square trinomial, I'm just going to go up to that number I put in a box earlier. I'm going to see what that number is. So scrolling up, the number in the box is negative 5 over 24. So that's the number that I'm going to use here. When I factor the perfect square trinomial, I'm going to turn the brackets into x minus 5 over 24 squared. And then at the end, I just have to subtract 25 over 288 from 288 over 288, which gives me a final answer of 2x minus 5 over 24 squared. And then I have negative 25 over 288 plus 288 over 288, which simplifies to positive 263 over 288. So what does that tell us about our vertex? Because now we have this in vertex form. Our vertex is from this number as well as this number. So the x-coordinate of my vertex is positive 5 over 24. Remember, it's the opposite of the sign you see here. So if you see a negative there, it's a positive in your vertex coordinate. And your y-coordinate is 263 over 288. And that is your final answer.